Welcome back onto one of our leading stories now. G7 leaders have agreed to donate 1 billion coronavirus vaccine doses to poorer countries. They've also backed an urgent plan on climate change to secure the future of the planet. The leaders, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, have wrapped up a 3-day summit in Cornwall in the UK. And our correspondent, Benji Hyer, he joins us now for this conversation. Benji, hopefully we've got a clearer signal between us. Obviously, we've got the summit that has just concluded, some sentiments that have been shared by our own President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding the outcomes of this. Just take us quickly through a highlight of some of the outcomes from the summit. I mean, obviously including this pledge by the G7 countries of the 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines.
Yes, well, Boris Johnson opened this summit saying he wants to build back better, greener and fairer, and there's been a number of proposals put forward and agreed upon now in order to address that. The first of which you've just raised, the vaccines, of course. Almost 1 billion to be rolled out over the next year. Joe Biden, the United States President, promising about half of those. There is going to be no waiving of intellectual property rights, however, on those vaccines. That's something that Cyril Ramaphosa has pushed very hard for, but we haven't seen that come out of the summit. And even though that 1 billion figure seems impressive to many people, the World Health Organization warns we need as much as 11 billion in order to confirm immunity universally. So there is still a lot to be done on that subject. But in order to address the other components of that build back better, greener, fairer mantra by Boris Johnson, we've also seen a programme put forward by the G7 nations which will effectively rival China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's to finance different transport infrastructure around the world in poorer nations and putting forward money in order to facilitate that. And then lastly, climate change, of course. We've seen big promises in regard to this, commitments to try to reduce the emissions that go out from across the world, especially those leading developing countries. And in addition to that, pledges to try to move away and phase out coal. That's seen as one of the biggest fossil fuel emitters, and so they really want to make progress on those grounds, especially with that upcoming COP26 summit held here in the UK. You have to recall as well that this is the first G7 summit without Donald Trump since Donald Trump was in the White House, and so it's been a very different tone here amongst the leaders. No spats, no rows necessarily, and certainly no kind of fiery insults over the barbecue. So leaders will be happy with the progress made so far, but on the issues that I've explained, there is still a bit of work to be done.
But it also appears as though, Benji, there's that issue around developing nations as well as their agenda versus developed nations as well as their way forward. Now, you're talking about the TRIPS waiver here. It's been a big contentious point here for developing nations in the fact that they want to see themselves manufacture their own vaccines and have the continent almost catch up to the rest of the global economy. With that not being heard quite clearly on, then how much of an influence do these developing nations actually have on such summits such as the G7 summit?
Well, look, it's worth noting from the outset here that Cyril Ramaphosa has highlighted and praised the progress on this point, even though there hasn't been that waiving of intellectual property rights, which would have enabled better access to those countries that are finding it hard to access the jabs and easier to manufacture it themselves. There is still what's seen as the step in the right direction here amid this gathering. So I think the kind of takeaway from the standpoint of those developing countries is, even though they haven't managed to as I say, waive those intellectual property rights or get all the promises that they were hoping for in terms of, for example, transportation infrastructure or indeed climate change, that this is something of a step in the right direction and some progress being made here. So that's sort of the outlook from Cornwall as we kind of take home from this weekend. And there's still, as I say, a number of summits to be held where there's going to be more progress made on a number of these points going forward. So the outlook seen amongst the nations here is an optimistic one, but it should be noted that given the fact that developing countries will hope to get better access to vaccines over the next few months, that progress that's been highlighted and praised, well, there's still more to be done on that.
Well, Benji, we leave it there for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us there, Benji Hyer, our UK correspondent.